So, in putting my sermon together for today, I had a little bit of a dilemma due to, you might be aware, there was an election this last week. And so, when we look at how to prepare for a sermon, there's often I believe it was one of the Niebuhr brothers who said that we hold the newspaper in one hand and the Bible in the other, and try and get those things to work together as we discern what the good news, what the gospel is for us in this time and place. And I sat down and started looking at the readings for this Sunday, and I thought, oh man. So, as you know, 3 years is our cycle. Every other cycle, we do this thing for half the year where we read different first readings and a different psalm that goes with it. The regular reading would have been fine and cool. These readings are awkward. Now, during this week, I was talking with Pastor Friederike and saying, how about we just use the other one that was assigned? And it was kind of like, aren't you the one always saying that we got to wrestle with the text that we don't want to wrestle with? And I thought, man, why? Why has it got to be this way? So what you're going to get this morning is a little bit of a disjointed sermon because each reading deserves, well, the first reading, the psalm and the gospel, deserve some comment. And in 28 years of ministry, I probably have enough fingers to count the number of times I've preached on the psalm, and today is one of those. Let's start with Ruth. So this last week, as we were leading into the election and from it, there was a lot of conversation about women. There was a lot of conversation about women and their rights and their safety from any number of different quarters. And in the midst of that lands this familiar passage from the story of Ruth and Naomi. Now, to catch you up on a few of the pieces here, so Naomi was married to a man who died. Her sons, of which she had several, also died. And Ruth's husband, the daughter-in-law, was one of the first to die. And she moved into the home of the next brother and the next brother, because culturally that's how that works, is that the surviving male relatives of the husband are the ones responsible for financially, for caring for those relatives. So when we think of biblical times, Social Security is having sons. That's how it worked. Now, that is kind of a powerful backdrop to the angst in our society. I think this will change, perhaps substantially, when Christ comes again. But these are eternal challenges. So Naomi finally decides, I have no more sons. My husband has died. I'm going to return to the land of my people. And my wider clan, hopefully, will support me. And Ruth, who is a Moabite, who is not Jewish, says, I will go with you. This is a tremendous story of loyalty. The fact that she goes with her mother-in-law instead of returning to her own clan, as Naomi suggested to her. So they return to the home country of Naomi. They come near to a kinsman, which I think is Hebrew. My grandfather in rural Indiana called it a shirt-tail relative, but somebody who's kind of hard to find on the family tree. Now, Boaz was a well-to-do farmer in the area and followed the laws of the Lord. One of the things that you were commanded to do was to leave some grain at the edge of your field for gleaning by those who were hungry. And Boaz, knowing that Naomi had returned, made a point to leave extra grain for Ruth to glean during that time. Boaz was seen as an upstanding citizen and understanding his responsibilities in this kind of challenging social circumstance. So, as we think about the role and place of women in society, where does this story go? Where the story goes is where Naomi, the mother-in-law, says to Ruth, I have this idea. Here's what I think you should do. You should wash yourself up nice, put on some perfume, put on your best clothes, go over to Boaz after work at his place when nobody else is there, slip in, but wait until he's already had something to eat and the work is done. And then, at that time, go in and uncover his feet. The Hebrew word is feet. But it does not mean feet. It means feet. Think about it. That's the plan for Social Security. That is the plan. Boaz seems like a great guy. I don't know him well, but he seems great. But when we think of the challenges in how vulnerable people, and I would say over the last few cycles here, we would say women specifically, the challenges are reflected in the subtext of this story that is just accepted as that's just the way it is, right? It's a real challenge. Now, I know you're waiting for the Pastor Matt special 30-second resolution to this, and you kind of whistle a happy tune out to your car, and the answer is no. We're going to flop around in this for a while and just, yeah, it's a thing. And I just wanted to share that this text that was assigned for today struck a chord that feels like is relevant to our time and place. So, with that thought in mind, we're going to move on to Christian nationalism. Buckle up. The psalm that we have for today maybe isn't as familiar to you. The psalm always goes with the first reading, so when we go the alternate route, we get the psalm with it. The psalm talks about children being a blessing. Yes, we sense that. That's a part of our understanding of things and so on and so forth. But there's a curious phrase in this that says, the children of your youth are like the arrows of a warrior. It is like having a quiver that is full. It's like having a quiver that is full. So first off, you could have a bunch of children, and it could be like a bouquet of flowers. Could be like a box of chocolates. Could be a basket of muffins. No, it's a quiver of arrows for a warrior. Now, the Christian nationalism piece of this is that if you Google as one word, quiverful, this is a movement in conservative evangelical circles, the families have as many children as they can. Some of you have perhaps heard of the Dugars on their television show with 57 kids or how many ever it is. It's, we bought 50 acres in Idaho so we could build our compound kind of scenario. It is hostility to the government. And it is a quiverful approach to the neighbor. What do you need these arrows for? The neighbor. You need these arrows for the neighbor. Certainly when this quiverful movement gets laid on top of our current cultural context, that's what those arrows are for, the neighbor. This is not Christian. Christians follow the teachings of Christ. They don't grab random passages from the Old Testament and places like Leviticus and shape their whole life around it. Christians, it's kind of in the name, you might say, follow Christ. So, now that I've solved that one for you, we're going to move on to the gospel text here. These aren't resolved, right? I think these texts remind us, and the election reminds us, that we are all children of God, made in the image of God, and we're missing a sense of humility in how we approach our neighbors. And I think that's something that we can reflect on as we move through, particularly in a place that intentionally is about getting together and being around our neighbors, whether we like them or not, right? Here we are. So, the gospel text, a different direction. And yes, I know we're in a capital campaign and it's all about stewardship. No, I did not pick this reading either. It is with the lectionary. There's a few things that are interesting in this because the reading that we did not read is about the widow of Zarephath and the hunger that they are experiencing and her generosity in giving food to the prophet. So it's a story about a widow. The story that we have instead, Naomi and Ruth, is a story of widows. And then in the gospel text, we have yet another story of a widow. When we think of that term in New Testament times, we get it from Paul as well, where he says, we took up an offering at this congregation so that we might support the church in Jerusalem and the widows. Because again, social security, safety net, it depended on male relatives, and not everybody has those or has them near. It's a difficult thing. So we have these pretentious scribes strutting around in their long robes as we take a look at people wanting to be seen for their generosity. The jingling of the bag of money, the pouring of it into the treasury, making sure to be there when there's enough people around so you get full social credit for what you have done, understanding that it likely was a fraction of what their capacity was to give. I know that in our society today, and there are different views as to the value of it or the significance of it, we are at a pretty significant point of wealth disparity in our society and world. You see the words robber baron come up quite a bit for historical comparison. And that feels significant because it's just an exciting term, right? But this idea of generosity because of what is given, if we think of what certain individuals have spent on presidential campaigns for that matter, but relative to their net value. And everybody jumps up and down about how big, how big, how big. I remember when I was first aware of this gospel text as a kid, when I would hear it in church, the first thing that struck me was that when the widow came, it was inconceivable that it would be somewhere where you would have to take 2 coins to make a penny. That just was the part that blew my mind. It added emphasis to this idea that she had so little. And she made a point to come and place that into the treasury. This profound sense that generosity and what we are called to be about is much more about the giver than the receiver. That's a fascinating piece. If I was going to tie these 3 kind of disparate pieces of the sermon together, is that if we look at the gospel text over and against the other readings, you'll notice that Jesus points out as an example the widow. The story of Jesus in the Gospels is a relationship and an illustration with his ministry towards women that set a completely different standard for their place in society. It was not unusual for women to be in the vanguard of financially supporting the ministry of Jesus. And in numerous places in Paul's ministry, the church was housed in a household led by a woman. So if we were to put all of these things together, we recognize that Jesus is looking at society and seeing those who are typically at the fringes of it and most vulnerable and saying, no, we need to center them and look to them as an example. So now that I've solved all these riddles for you, I hope you wrestle with these texts a little bit, and if there's something that comes to your mind after rolling it around in your head, I would love to hear that, so be in touch. Amen. Please stand as you are able.